Hey everybody, welcome out to the Dice Tower. My name is Chris Yee, and I like Euro games. I like worker placement games. I like midweight to heavy, Renaissance period or medieval themed, and plenty of ugly games, right? That is one of the things I'm very okay with. And so occasionally the game comes along that's actually really beautiful. That's kind of this middleweight worker placement game that takes place in a medieval jousting type setting. And Gloria Game of Knights is one of these. Has fantastic artwork, it has a very cool presentation, and it is a genre of game that I enjoy, worker placement. So let me show you how it plays. I won't go over every single rule, right? You'll have an idea of what the game is about, and then I'll give you my thoughts on it. Set up for Gloria Game of Knights. This is a worker placement game where each player will have 6 of their knights, or horse worker meeples out here, that they'll be putting out onto different spots around the board to collect resources and cards and such, and then that'll help them in the jousting tournament side. There's a round tracker along the side here. There's basically 3 acts to the game. Act 1, you go through each of these steps. Act 2, you go through each of these steps. Act 3, you go through all the same steps, and then some endgame scoring. This tracker along the outside here will help us kind of see the flow of the game. So during the worker phase, players will take turns putting each of these horses out here onto a different spot and collecting these, whatever resources. The faith tokens, for example, let you re-roll when you get to the jousting tournament with the dice. Other players will then go and place one worker out at a time. These spots here in these smaller locations are limited, whereas these larger spots out here, any number of workers can go out to. Some of these spots allow you to sell your coins that you acquire in order to upgrade your armor and your horses. If you upgrade your armor and your horses to the next levels, you're allowed to roll more dice during those phases, or you're allowed to have an exploding dice effect. Some spots, like over here, allow you to grab some of these cards that you'll get to activate during another phase of the game. And this spot up here allows you to spend money to get some of these characters that you can use during jousts. After players finish putting out all their workers, you'll go to the card playing phase. These cards that you collected earlier, you can now play up to 3 of them from your hand. The red-backed ones you get for the immediate effect, victory points, or maybe these tiebreaker stars. The darker brown ones, you have to pay a number of coins in order to get whatever is shown there. And the last one, the black-backed ones, are extra fights. You go to in a fight phase immediately, you have to roll this number or higher, and then you get the reward here shown on the right. Afterwards, we're going to reset the market, and then we'll seed ourselves in the fight phase. During the seeding step of the game, you can place up to 2 of your banners out, so you might place over here, and then another player is going to put some of theirs out, then it comes back to you, and you choose basically which fights you're going to go to, because the last phase of each round is actually the combat itself. Now that I've seeded myself into these fights here, I'm going to look at my equipment and the number of strength resources I want to spend. That'll determine my dice pool for each battle. So here I have to roll at least 11 or higher. I have a level 4 horse, which allows me to roll 3 dice, level 3 armor, which allows me to roll 3 of the white dice, and I can choose how much strength I want to spend. So if I spend, say, 2 of these red strength resource, I can roll 2 of these dice. That's my dice pool for this combat. So now I'm going to roll for the combat here. The white dice have a maximum of 3, so that's great. The black dice go up to 4, but I only rolled a 2. That's my highest one. See, I'm only taking the highest die of each of the different colors that I rolled here. So I've got this here, 4 on the red, 3 on the white, and 2 on the blue. We see that's only 9. That's not enough here. So maybe I can spend some of these different effects and the relics and stuff that I gained throughout the earlier worker placement phase. This, for example, allows me to turn if it'll focus, if I can turn any one of my black dice to show the 4 success symbol. So if I do that, now I have had 11, and so we go to tiebreaker, and if I have more stars than this thing, I can win the combat. You have to do 2 successes in each joust, and then if you are the winner, you'll collect this number of victory points. Then you move to the next combat here, where you'll go through the whole steps again, spend strength resources, spend these things. If you succeed, then you exhaust them and you can't use them again for this fight phase. And you go through and you try to collect as many points as you can from the multiple combats. Once the combat round is done, you'll go back to worker placement phase, play the 3 cards phase, reset everything, seed yourself into the combat lineup, and then you'll do your last round of combat. Once you've done this 3 times, you're allowed to play up to 3 more of these cards from your hand, and then finally there's an endgame scoring where there's 3 open main objectives that are shown on the side that all players are working towards, and any secret objectives that players have acquired into their own personal hand are then scored at the end of the game based on different things that they've collected or resources they have left over at the end. Last thing I'd like to make note of, there are two different options for play here. You can see how these are little brackets that you can sign up for in individual combat that you want to sign up for. The backside of this is a more interactive version where players and these non-player characters will be going into an actual bracket, and the winner of this combat here will move on to the next step. So at some point, playable characters will end up fighting each other as well, and then there's a reward for the ultimate winner, as well as the points that are earned from each individual combat.
So I'm going to start by talking about the presentation, the overall appearance of this game. I'm really impressed with that. I think that the look of it, the artwork, there's actual artwork throughout the game that surprises me and intrigues me how good it is. Many games kind of in this setting and everything, I feel like they don't put their best foot forward, and they make it look bland. This one excited me, and I really appreciate that about it. The pieces, even the worker placement pieces you put out there, are the meeples of the knights on horseback and everything like that. Just things like that. That if you told me, hey, this is this company's first game, I would be very surprised. In fact, this is, if I understand correctly, Stratego's, if not their first, one of the very early games. I think there's a lot of things about it that are good. However, I will say that the biggest thing that really brings this game down for me is the fact that when you get to the dueling phase, the jousting phase, it slows down a lot. It's quick worker placement. Very few spots are exclusive. There's very few spots. If you go there, you cut off somebody else. And at the higher player counts, there's 2 of them. And they do a good job of scaling down. And so most of the spots are just open. Any number of workers can go there. But there are things like buy those people across the top, get their influence. Or buy those cards along the side where you can play those in the later phase of the game. So the thing is that all these spaces are dwindling. Not so much the spaces, but what's available at those spaces. You can get endgame objectives, but people are cycling through those. And so there's not a lot of tension in the worker placement, which I missed a little bit. I felt like that made this game almost too breezy, the worker placement phase. Boom, 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 boom. You just roll through it really quick because, you took that card, whatever, I'll go to that spot and I'll grab a bunch of other cards that are good for me. And there are some cool powers. There's powers that let you grab more cards when you go there, which sounds great until you realize, I can only play 3 of these per round, and then another 3 at the end. I think that's a smart thing. But like I said, let me go back to that issue for a moment. I like the worker placement, even if it's maybe a little bit too light and breezy, but when it gets to the jousting phase, it's dice rolling with good mitigation. You can get people that allow you to flip dice, or you can spend your faith tokens to re-roll up to 2 of the dice in the combat, or maybe you can get an upgrade that lets you use a faith token to re-roll up to 3 dice. That's good. I like that type of mitigation in these combative type games. But there's along the bottom of your player board, there's a very procedural arc that you got to go through, and a person can get more combats than you. You're guaranteed 2. You could take an action to get a 3rd combat, a 3rd joust during each of the combat phases. And so if you're done with your combats, you're done flipping your tokens and spending these, and if I won, then my resources are exhausted, but if I lost it, darn it, I get those resources back, so that I can use it again in the next combat. Once you're done, and someone else still has more combats to resolve, you're kind of twiddling your fingers. You're just twiddling your thumbs, or you're just kind of waiting, right? Okay. And then you get to the card play phase. Hey, I play this card to get some resources, play this card to get points. I spend 3 coins to get an upgrade to my armor. Sweet. Someone else says, I'm doing 2 or 3 combats of cards this game. And you got to wait for them to win 2 tilts. They got to do 2, the best 2 out of 3 on the jousts. And so you're waiting on them to do that. And you're waiting. Okay, now we go to the combat, the actual combat jousting phase, and they have more combats than you, and so you're waiting again. It kind of drags the game out a little bit too much for how light and approachable this game is. I think this game is overall fairly approachable, has a few too many little rules in it. I'll give you an example here. This is the excerpt of the rule book here that shows if you are doing the player versus player side, the bracket side of the jousting, when 2 players are fighting each other, this is an example of how a duel could go, because you have to be very procedural with, okay, the player with the lower roll is going to be the first one to use an adjustment, and then the other player can do an adjustment, and then it goes back to you. You can do one more adjustment, then this person can do an adjustment, and then that player then can use one of their relics, and you only get to use one, and then this person gets to do the relics. That's not terribly intuitive, and there's a lot of like little rules going on. When it's just you versus the generic knight piece that's out there on the board, you can go through that fairly quickly. But as soon as two people are going into a combat and you're not in it, once again, it kind of adds to that, I'm waiting while other people are playing the game. It's too bad. It really is. And also, just a few of the things are unintuitively out of order. For example, all of the resources that you spend, if you win a combat, they're exhausted until you hit a refresh phase, which is after you play cards the next time. So if you go into a combat with cards that you play as one of your 3 cards, then you don't have the resources yet unexhausted from your previous jousts, but then after you do the card phase, you hit the refresh where everything refreshes, then you go into the board joust. Little things like that that could have been restructured and reordered to be a little bit more intuitive. Overall, I enjoy this game, but I'm not clamoring to come back to it because of those issues that I have with it. But because I am impressed with a lot of it overall, this is a company I want to be looking out for. And maybe in the future, if there's like a Gloria Game of Nights, like a 2nd edition that kind of streamlines some of those issues, I would be absolutely interested because I had fun with it, but it drags out. And so I'm going to be giving this one a score of a 6 overall. A 6 means that I think this is a game that it will have its audience, and I would play it again in a little while, right? But I would be cognizant maybe not to play it with more players, especially with the player versus player bracket side of things, where I know I'm going to be sitting there kind of waiting for a while. So overall, I mean, that's my thoughts. Maybe this is a game that does catch your eye. It's definitely eye-catching, and I think that's something good to say about it. So that's my review on Gloria Game of Nights. My name is Chris Yee. Thank you for coming by the Dice Tower. Have yourselves a great day.